A night, we begin in silence. Not the peaceful kind of silence either. Not birds singing outside your window. Not soft rain tapping against the roof. No, this is the heavy silence of an old stone building that has been standing for so long, it almost feels tired. Far from crowded cities and noisy roads, there once stood a monastery hidden deep in the hills. The kind of place where candles burned more often than sunlight entered. The kind of place where even footsteps sounded guilty. The monks who lived there spent their lives copying books by hand. Every page carefully written. Every word important. In the medieval world, writing something down was serious business. Ink lasted longer than people did. Kings knew this. Queens knew this. And ambitious relatives definitely knew this. Because if your name was written into history, you mattered. If your name vanished, well, that was a different story. One winter evening, according to a much later account, a scholar arrived at the monastery archives searching for old royal tax records. Which sounds incredibly boring. And honestly, it probably was for the first few hours. But somewhere deep inside the archive rooms, hidden behind shelves swollen with damp and age, he found something strange. A damaged royal ledger. Its leather cover had almost fallen apart. The corners were blackened like it had once been close to a fire. Dust covered every inch of it. The pages crackled when touched. The scholar opened it carefully. Inside were lists of royal births, marriages, deaths, alliances, inheritances, all the important details that kept kingdoms running smoothly. Or at least pretending to run smoothly. But then he noticed something unusual. One name appeared over and over again. And every single time, it had been scratched out. Not faded naturally. Not ruined by time. Deliberately removed. Someone had taken a knife to the parchment itself. Imagine sitting there in the freezing candlelight and realizing that a person had not only been forgotten, but erased. That is where our story begins. Now, medieval records disappeared all the time. Fires happened constantly. Armies looted monasteries. Rats probably ate half of Europe at some point. Honestly, medieval history surviving at all is a miracle. But this felt different. The scratching was careful, precise, almost emotional. Like whoever removed the name wanted to make very sure nobody would ever read it again. And yet traces still remained. A few letters here. A broken family seal there. Tiny clues hiding beneath damaged ink. Enough for one unsettling conclusion. A royal once existed here. A royal important enough to appear in succession records. And then suddenly, nothing. No official death. No burial site. No final ceremony. No clear explanation. Just silence. The scholar became obsessed almost immediately, which is honestly the most historian thing imaginable. Give historians one mysterious footnote and suddenly they stop sleeping for 6 months. He searched deeper through the monastery archives. Most records repeated the same strange pattern. Whenever this unknown royal appeared, parts of the text had been damaged intentionally. Sometimes entire paragraphs were cut away. In one manuscript, the missing royal was replaced with blank space, as if the writers simply skipped over them entirely. Which somehow feels even creepier. Like history itself paused awkwardly and changed the subject. Meanwhile, outside the monastery walls, winter storms covered the hills in snow. Wind rattled the narrow windows. Candles flickered across rows of ancient books. And slowly, piece by piece, the forgotten story began to emerge. Not clearly. Not all at once. More like fragments floating upward from deep water. The erased royal had likely been born into one of the most powerful families in the kingdom. Their name appeared beside princes, queens, and noble heirs. At first, the records treated them normally. Then suddenly, the tone changed. Mentions became shorter, less detailed, almost cautious, and then eventually, gone. You might think deleting somebody from history would be simple, but royal courts were complicated machines. Every birth affected inheritance. Every marriage changed alliances. Every child could become a political threat 20 years later. Especially in medieval kingdoms, where family dinners probably felt less like family dinners and more like very polite hostage negotiations. One wrong succession claim could start wars. One forgotten heir could ruin a dynasty. And that may explain why this disappearance mattered so much. Because somebody clearly feared this royal even after they vanished. Enough to rewrite records. Enough to alter official histories. Enough to pretend they had never existed at all. But here is the strange thing about history. It does not stay buried quietly. Even damaged records leave shadows behind. The scholar eventually discovered references hidden in unrelated documents. Tiny mentions tucked into monastery expense lists, land agreements, and letters between nobles. One document referred to the absent royal. Another mentioned the sorrow within the palace. One nervous scribe even wrote a line that historians still argue about today. Some names are dangerous even after death. Comforting thought before sleep. And the deeper the scholar searched, the stranger everything became. Several royal family trees from later centuries had obvious gaps in them. Dates no longer matched properly. Certain marriages made no political sense unless another royal figure had once existed in between. It was as though history had been stitched back together badly after tearing apart. Imagine finding an old painting where someone carefully painted over a person standing in the corner. You can still see the shape underneath if the light hits it correctly. That was this mystery, a hidden outline beneath official history. And perhaps the most chilling part of all was this: the erasure worked. For centuries, almost nobody remembered the missing royal existed. No famous legends survived. No grand monuments were built. No dramatic songs echoed through taverns. Just scattered fragments hidden in silence. A life reduced to scratches on parchment. And maybe that is what makes this story feel so unsettling tonight. Not the possibility of murder. Not the court conspiracies. Not even the disappearance itself. But the realization that power could reach backward into memory and decide who deserved to be remembered at all. Kings fought wars for glory. Queens built churches for legacy. Families spent fortunes making sure their names survived forever. Yet somewhere in the cold darkness of history, one royal figure nearly disappeared completely. Almost. Because despite the knives taken to parchment, despite the burned records, despite centuries of silence, a few traces remained. Just enough for us to follow. And as the candles burned low inside the monastery archive, the scholar turned another fragile page and realized something important. The missing royal had not been erased by accident. They had been erased for a reason. Long before the missing royal vanished from history. Before the scratched-out records. Before the whispers. Before nervous scribes started avoiding certain names like they were cursed. There was simply a child, born into warmth, candlelight, and impossible expectations. The royal palace stood high above the capital city, its stone towers watching over narrow streets crowded with merchants, bakers, blacksmiths, wandering priests, and probably at least 3 suspicious goats at any given moment. Medieval cities were chaotic places, beautiful from far away, much smellier up close. But above all that noise and smoke stood the royal court, separated from ordinary life by thick walls, armed guards, and enough rules to make breathing feel formal. And inside those walls, during one bitter winter night, bells rang across the palace. The child had arrived. Servants rushed through corridors carrying hot water and clean cloth. Noble relatives gathered in private chambers pretending to be calm while secretly calculating what this birth might mean for the kingdom. Because royal births were never just family events. They were political events. A new royal child could change alliances, inheritance plans, peace treaties, and future wars before they even learned how to walk properly. Which feels like a lot of pressure for someone who had just discovered blinking. According to surviving records, the child was born during a snowstorm so heavy that travelers became trapped outside the city gates for 2 full days. Some later storytellers claimed this was an omen. Medieval people loved omens. A strange bird? Omen. Red moon? Omen. Goat standing weirdly in a field? Probably an omen too. Honestly, people back then would have treated a burnt piece of toast like a message from destiny. Still, the storm became part of palace memory. The child entered the world while snow buried the kingdom in silence. And for a brief moment, the entire royal court celebrated. The palace chapel prepared for baptism almost immediately. Royal children were baptized quickly in medieval times because illness was everywhere and childhood survival was never guaranteed. Priests lit candles along the chapel walls. Golden cloth hung behind the altar. Incense drifted slowly through the air. Nobles arrived wearing heavy velvet robes trimmed with fur, trying very hard to look holy and important at the same time. The baby, meanwhile, probably just wanted a nap. The royal family stood proudly before the court as the priest poured sacred water over the infant's head and officially welcomed another member into the dynasty. Another branch added to the family tree. Another future to plan around. Another life already trapped by royal duty before it had even begun. That was the strange thing about being born royal. Your future was decided almost immediately. Ordinary people could sometimes disappear into the world. A farmer's son might become a soldier. A merchant's daughter might travel to another town. But royals lived inside invisible cages built from expectation. Every friendship mattered. Every marriage mattered. Every public appearance mattered. Even children were watched carefully. Especially children. As the forgotten royal grew older, palace life settled into routine. Morning lessons began early. Very early. The kind of early that makes modern school mornings look merciful. Tutors taught reading, history, religion, languages, etiquette, and diplomacy. Royal children were expected to speak carefully, stand correctly, eat properly, and never embarrass the family in front of foreign guests. Which sounds exhausting, honestly. Imagine being judged because you held a spoon incorrectly at age 9. The royal court believed manners reflected power. A future ruler had to appear calm and controlled at all times. Even during enormous feasts where people were casually eating entire roasted animals with their hands. History is complicated like that. The forgotten royal spent long hours inside library chambers learning from old manuscripts while winter winds rattled against the palace windows. Outside, the kingdom continued moving through its ordinary struggles. Farmers worried about harvests. Merchants argued over taxes. Soldiers trained in muddy courtyards. But inside the palace, life followed ceremony after ceremony after ceremony. Everything had rules. How to greet nobles. How many steps behind the king one should walk. Who sat where during dinner. Who could speak first. Who could never speak first. Honestly, surviving medieval court politics probably required the patience of a saint and the memory of an accountant. Yet among all these rigid traditions, the young royal slowly developed into a quieter figure than their siblings. At least according to the scattered descriptions that survived. Other royal children hunted, argued loudly, competed for attention, or charmed visiting nobles. But this royal preferred quieter places. Libraries, gardens, chapel corridors. One later account claimed they enjoyed walking through the palace aviary, feeding birds while servants searched half the castle trying to locate them before formal events. Which is honestly a very relatable response to royal ceremonies. Some tutors described the child as thoughtful. Others used words like distant. One nervous court official reportedly wrote that the young royal watched more than they spoke. And in royal courts, quiet people often made others uncomfortable. Because loud ambition was predictable. Silence was not. The royal family itself remained powerful but deeply complicated. The king ruled with strict authority, determined to strengthen the dynasty against rival noble houses. The queen maintained the delicate social balance of court life, arranging alliances through dinners, marriages, and endless negotiations hidden beneath polite conversation. Meanwhile, siblings competed constantly for favor and influence. Not always openly. Royal families rarely screamed dramatic insults across banquet halls like in modern television dramas. Most court rivalries happened quietly. Cold smiles, careful insults, forgotten invitations. The medieval version of, "I saw your message and chose not to answer." And somewhere inside this carefully controlled world, the forgotten royal grew older. Season after season passed. Winters wrapped snow around the palace towers. Spring filled the gardens with color. Summer brought tournaments, festivals, and diplomatic visitors from distant lands. Autumn covered the castle courtyards in wet leaves and fog. The royal child watched it all. Learning, listening, becoming part of the machinery of the court while somehow remaining slightly apart from it at the same time. But there was one important truth already beginning to shape their future. The forgotten royal was not expected to matter very much. Not yet anyway. There were older heirs ahead in succession. More charismatic relatives. Better political matches. The court paid attention to whoever seemed most useful to the future of the dynasty. And that often left quieter royals drifting unnoticed through the edges of palace life. At first, this likely felt like freedom. Less pressure. Less scrutiny. Less responsibility. But in royal courts, being overlooked could become dangerous surprisingly fast. Because invisible people heard things. They noticed tensions others ignored. They saw which nobles whispered together after meetings. Which servants carried secret letters. Which advisors suddenly stopped speaking when certain names entered the room. And slowly, almost quietly, the forgotten royal began growing up inside a palace filled with secrets. Though nobody knew yet how dangerous those secrets would become. Not the tutors. Not the servants. Not even the royal family themselves. Because somewhere ahead, hidden beyond years of ceremony and routine, something was waiting. Something powerful enough to erase a royal life from history itself.